It's been a long night in Copenhagen, and discussions are still ongoing this morning, but we do have what's being called the Copenhagen Accord. We're being told that the accord will limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, but the fact is this morning there are several pages in the accord that are still blank. Countries are being told that they need to fill in their own emissions targets and that these are due by February 2010. The fact is, this is a deal that right now is not legally binding and won't be till at least the end of 2010. Many are saying that this is the worst process in the history of the UN, and there are several countries today that have still not agreed to the Copenhagen Accord. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Sudan, Bolivia. They've been incredibly vocal in their disappointment. This morning in one of the final plenaries, Sudan said, "This document is murderous. It condemns Africa. You're asking us to sign on to a suicide pact." Scientists say that a rise in global emissions by 2 degrees Celsius will mean that millions of people will be out of water. It'll mean that Africa by 2020 could produce anywhere between 30 and 50% less food. This is an agreement in which countries who are most at risk can't help but take this personally. Others are saying that this is an agreement that puts the US and China on the same page, and therefore that's a critical step forward. For Canada, I would offer that we need to be asking ourselves today if our government truly represented us in Copenhagen at this historic moment in time. Over the last week, 125,000 people have signed on to the Avaz petition calling on our Prime Minister to support a strong agreement in Copenhagen. The polls in Canada show that the majority of us wanted to see strong leadership here on climate change. Yet this week we saw leaked documents from Canada that show that our government is weakening our position, that this is a government that is not committed to seriously reduce emissions from heavy industry. And in fact, they're leaving the oil industry almost entirely off the hook. The fact is, in Canada, the majority of our emissions, and definitely the majority of our emissions rise, come from heavy industry. So while we saw this week that cities from Vancouver to Toronto are taking action, while the provinces, British Columbia, Quebec, Ontario, and others are doing what they can to reduce emissions, to put forward a price on carbon, we are not seeing that kind of leadership from our federal government. Across the country, Canadians are walking to work. We are changing our light bulbs. But the fact is, we can't solve global warming alone. And the government's refusal to have heavy industry do its fair share, in effect, wipes out our efforts across the country. Equally important, we heard this week aggressive plans from China, from the US, from Europe to scale up clean energy, to build a new clean energy economy. But from Canada, we have one good program in Canada at a federal level that has meant that we do have wind farms in British Columbia and Ontario and many other renewable projects. It's the Eco Energy Program, and as of today, the government has still refused to refund it. In the coming days and weeks and months ahead, we'll continue on Zero Carbon Canada to analyze what this means for the world and what it means for Canada. We'll continue at Power Up Canada to advocate for stronger laws to build a clean energy economy in Canada and to ensure that Canada gets serious on addressing our global warming emissions. And we're asking you to continue to join us. If you haven't already joined Power Up Canada on our site, please do, and ask your friends to do as well, because alone we can change our light bulbs, but together we can change our laws.